I just realized I've been streaming to nobody for a while. I'm sorry, guys. It's been a really long time since I've streamed. Oh, Lord. I've been talking for the last 7 minutes, and I literally have been talking to nobody. Oh, Lord. If you can't tell, I've been a little, things have been a little odd lately. Oh, I'm sorry about that, folks, if you've been watching. Oh, anyway, this video is not going to be overly complex. I initially set this up to be a kind of a light dive into the 40K universe. It's I didn't want this to be anything deep. I didn't want this to be anything amazingly comprehensive. This is just a look at some of the themes and some of the crazier stuff. Yes, that we started with 7 minutes of silence just so you could understand how cold and dark the 41st millennium actually is. That's one of the things that's always tripped me up about 40K, as I keep thinking it's like, oh, it's the year 40,000, and it's like, well, we're in the year 2000, which means we're in the second millennium, so it's roughly what, 8 times the distance from the time Christ was born or died, or whichever one zero is, to now. And that's not 8 times. What am I thinking? Oh, my brain just does not want to math today. That's 20 times. But anyway, so let's establish a little bit of the setting in case people aren't familiar with 40K. I don't imagine how you couldn't be, because it's literally all over the internet, YouTube and Twitter and whatnot. So basically in 40K, humans are everywhere, which is kind of a nice change from a lot of sci-fi where humans are constantly in the minority. Humans long ago conquered the galaxy, they fell apart, and then a being known as the God Emperor arose from humanity and basically took over and brought everybody back together. There are some other races, basically the minor races of the Xenos, being the Orcs, the Eldar, the Tau, which I don't like to mention because they're space commies, and then a few other minor. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, there's only literary analysis. Actually, from what I understand, and I'm not a major fan, but from what I understand of 40K, literary analysis probably wouldn't be appreciated. You would you would probably be sent to a penal colony, if not outright executed. Not that I think they keep many people literate. Well, I guess it depends on where you stand. If you're on a feudal world, literacy really isn't necessary. But that being said, let's talk about some of the stuff that actually makes 40K grimdark. And I don't want to talk about the constant war, because war has actually been a staple of humanity for almost as long as there's been humanity. It's really only in the last 100 years that we've known relative peace. The world's kind of been in a constant state of war. One of the things I think really makes 40K dark is, well, the almost impenetrable, overbearing government. So you have the Administratum, which is this galaxy spanning bureaucracy. And getting a problem even noticed, let alone solved, can take multiple lifetimes. And in fact, getting it solved or getting it addressed might be even worse than having the problem in the first place, as it's a government that doesn't even have to pretend that it cares about you. You are literally just a statistic to them. If you're lucky, you're a number on a piece of paper somewhere lost in the shuffle of paperwork, not even making it to Earth. Yes, you got to keep the masses. I'm going to start bringing these up. Yes, you got to start keeping the masses safe from knowledge, as it invites heresy and chaos gods of knowledge and intrigue. Yes, actually, in 40K, knowledge is dangerous. But also in our own world, certain knowledge can be dangerous. People get traumatized all the time going through an experience, learning how bad something is. We get soldiers who go out into the battlefield and they become traumatized by what was out there and they can't take it. Chaos works along similar lines. Some knowledge is just too much for certain people. Part of that, it gets into the psychology of what we can tolerate, what we can stand, what we can actually comprehend because we build our knowledge of what the universe is. And then we comprehend, oh, we come into contact with something that basically shatters our entire worldview. Now imagine if there was a malevolent intelligence behind that knowledge. It could be profoundly corrupting and destructive. And humans aren't rational creatures by nature. I mean, we'll breed before we eat. That has been scientifically proven. We'll try to make more humans, regardless of if there's food to feed those humans. But getting back to the crushing actual government of 40K, how exactly do you get a government to care about you when they could literally bomb your planet into extinction and then just replace you with people from somewhere else? They don't even have to care about you. And really, one of the few ways to get them to somewhat care about you is to join the military, where they'll feed you and arm you. Granted, they'll probably throw you against some giant spacefaring murder bugs. But hey, at least you have food, which is more than a lot of people can say. Well, they have food. They have corpse starch, which is exactly what it says. They didn't even try to dress it up like you would see in other sci-fi. Oh no, it's people. No, the people in 40K actually know they're eating people. It supplements their diet. I mean, they sanitize it so you don't get kuru, but that being said, there's also the catch that 40K is technically, like, the Imperium of Man is technically more advanced than we are. From what I understand, they have remarkable medical capabilities. They have remarkable actual industrial and agricultural capabilities. But imagine being advanced, but still being in decline. It's a weird position to be in because they're far more advanced than we are in a lot of respects. I also want to take a moment to note that one of the things that makes 40K so interesting as weird is when Games Workshop threw it together, they basically just ripped off a bunch of people from everywhere else. Like, they ripped off a bunch of action movies from the 80s. They ripped off Lord of the Rings. It was basically their Warhammer franchise set in space. And it was silly. It was meant to be silly. And then they started adding stuff and writing stories, and you can only make something silly for so long before you become serious about it. It's like when you introduce a silly character into a D&D party, and then 20 sessions later, they're just as serious about everything as everyone else. Their backstory no longer feels quite so silly because of all the crazy stuff they've gone through. And I feel like, what's it been, 30, 40 years since Warhammer became a thing? Over that time, it stopped being silly. It's become something rather dark and serious. But that being said, let me pull up my outline here. I really need to get a third monitor, but I'm running this on my old computer because for some reason I can't get the audio to work right on my new laptop. Maybe I should light some incense and pray to the machine spirits of my laptop to make it work better. Or I could go through a tutorial video. I really don't want to do that again. I do this mostly for fun. So I have to say, it's not the war that makes 40K a grim, dark setting. It's the things that are related to the overbearing government. Everything is industrialized to an insane scale. It's, and I don't even want to say it's industry. It's more that they have they have done what, and again, I have to say it's not a fascist government. I've heard people say that, though it does have some of the hallmarks of it, where it'll take what it thinks works and then try to apply that solution to every problem. Now, let's see here. If you consider the bolter, the weapon, it's a crossbreed of a machine gun and a rocket launcher, the ultimate Rambo weapon. It sounds like something that would be it sounds like something the Germans would make, honestly, just over designed. So I can understand having explosive munitions, which already exists. You can have bullets that blow up on impact. But having one rocket assisted, that's so you can fire a solid slug a good bit harder than you could fire any kind of rocket, to be perfectly frank. And firing a rocket would be counterproductive because they're, from what I understand, they're kind of fragile. But having something now, it's, and don't get me wrong, the rule of cool applies. Having an automatic rocket launcher that's basically a cross between a machine gun that you can carry around in your hand is damn near awesome. I guess if I remember correctly, because I remember watching a video about this, they have some kind of minor aiming capability, which definitely could help. Like having bullets that auto aim or at least assist in aiming would be an amazing advantage. But and I remember originally I thought that the bolter was was just something that the Space Marines used. And then it turns out that there's bolters of all shapes and sizes that literally anybody can have one. And that, I feel like that kind of diminished some of the magic because they also have standard guns. You know, they have standard auto pistols and auto guns, which are just solid slug weapons. So why would you continue to have those if bolters are a thing, if they do aim assist? That being said, that is not the most horrifying weapon, or that's not even the coolest weapon that I think 40k has. Uh, I think it's the oh lord, I can't remember it. It's the one that uses the screaming ammunition. It's a siege weapon, and the weapon, the ammunition is literally made from the remains of the planets they blow up. Like that is that is spectacularly dark, and I think by far the scariest weapon to utilize. Can you imagine the attrition that you're going to have from the people firing this thing? It's like, sir, the ammunition is screaming at me. The jaded general looks at him and is like, son, there's a reason it's screaming. And if you knew what it was, you'd be screaming too. um, no, I don't think it's, actually, I think it's a weapon the Imperium uses. They use it on Titans to break down walls. The I don't think the Space Marines need weapons that scream. They are need ammo that scream. They already have weapons that scream. Like they literally take what the Imperium has and possess it with demons. Which is another concept that I have to admit that I love about 40k, that it's not just the organics that can be possessed by demons. Literally anything. Machines can be possessed by demons, computers can be possessed by demons. Uh, I will say playing Rogue Trader really opened my eyes to some of the possibilities. I've heard other people who are far more into 40k say it's very, very true to the lore. And there's a part where you're going to a Mechanicus world, and they talk about the scrap code that that Chaos uses to corrupt beings with augments and machines. That they basically just bombard machines with scrap code until they submit. And I just imagine it being like indoctrinating people. You just cover them in propaganda and screeching until they basically submit to what you want. And it brings up the concept of how different are humans from machines. And again, it could be just I'm just overthinking this. But just they're basically bombarding the machines with propaganda until the machine submits to the propaganda. That being said, the blurring the line between man and machine is always a good concept, at least in story. Let's see here. The Eternal Crusade, the Chaos Marine has screaming bolters. I did not know that. That seems so unnecessary. Oh yeah, the Quake can. So I know there's the Earthshaker, which is their artillery. It might be the Quake cannon. I know they have the Volcano cannon, which is a giant laser gun, which literally melts the terrain when it's fired, and the crystals that they use to make this thing can only be mined from this one highly volcanic world. Like, can you imagine being a miner that has to work on a volcano world? Like, forget the heat and the lava, just the gas-filled tunnels would do you in before anything else. Like, how can you even have breathable air? Well, suits, I guess. That being said, let's talk about the penal colonies because that's an eye opener right there. So, a lot of work in the Imperium, not all of it, probably not even the bulk of it, is done on penal colonies where they basically, oh, we'll talk about servitors. We'll talk about servitors in a moment. Yeah, we're going to talk about servitors in a moment. But before servitorship, which I think is far crueler, they have penal colonies where they send people to mine for things that they wouldn't send respectable citizens to mine. And you reach a part. So and just like in Rogue Trader, I'll probably use that a lot because I've spent about 100 some odd hours playing it at this point. They send people who are prisoners or criminals, but the thing in 40K is each planet makes their own laws, so the crime can be anything from murder to somebody used the letter S on a planet where using the letter S is forbidden. And they'll send them off to basically work to death as, well, slaves to the Imperium. But there is something worse, and that's the servitors. So the servitors are one of the things that really make 40K grim dark. So you can be sentenced to what I believe is called servitude in perpetuus, in which case they send you through servitorization, where they swap out your body parts for augmetics. They give you a lobotomy and wipe your memory, and they basically use you as factory equipment, door openers, or war machines for whatever they really need because they can't use computers to the level that they want. Well, the problem is the lobotomy doesn't always work because it's done on an industrial scale. So you could literally be stuck on an assembly line for a millennia, just doing the same repetitive task, completely aware of what's going on, but unable to stop your body from doing it, which is a that's more horror than grimdark. But whew, I think servitors are probably about the cruelest thing in the Imperium. And actually, when you play some of the games, you are play for Rogue Trader, you do have the option several times to send people to be servitorized. I can't imagine just the general cruelty of doing something like that to somebody. But it also shows the disconnect between those who are in charge and those who aren't. And that's it. So one thing about 40K that I don't find grimdark is the feudal worlds. So 40K, the Imperium is a fairly advanced place. Like by our standards, they're fairly advanced, even if they're a little bit backwards in how things work and they approach things from the wrong direction. But they have feudal worlds, and this is basically just a whole bunch of people at a world that can sustain life and just let them produce what they can because they're basically getting something for nothing. They have to provide next to nothing to these little colonies. And granted, they get a very small trickle of resources, but it's resources they don't have to supervise, they don't have to put anything into. And if you're going to be stuck in 40K, that's probably the best place to be stuck. Unless the Tyranids come and eat everybody, or the Gene Stealers come and get everybody ready to be eaten by the Tyranids. But that being said, I'd still wanted to touch a little bit more on just the actual government of 40K because I think that's what truly makes it grim dark. Just having this monstrous, unbreakable bureaucracy that you can't even touch, run by, would it be plutocrats? I guess they're just elite, just lord high, like the high lords of Terra. The so yeah, you got the worst of both sense. You got the worst of both worlds. You've not only got a nobility, but you've got an endless bureaucracy. And they're the ones that basically run everything, but they've also got their power struggles. And I'm just imagining the DMV on steroids. Like, imagine trying to get anything done, and you have to go to a bureaucracy that's so big it literally encapsulates entire worlds. Like, they have computers, but I imagine the computers in 40K are a lot like Windows 95. Oh, Actually, the government doesn't seem that stable. So everything I've seen, there's all these different factions that are all vying for power. And while some are supposed to be above the others, they all use everything they can against the others. So undoubtedly, the most powerful organization is probably the Inquisition, just for the resources they can pull and the things that they can do. But you've got the Administratum, which can basically lose the paperwork for anything, make anything take forever. You've got the Minitorum, which is the largest military body in the entire Imperium. They literally are the military. That being said, I don't remember if the Minitorum and the Navy are separate entities, which would be really odd if they were, because the military can't go anywhere unless they have the ships to go somewhere. But the Navy, being a completely separate body, could just simply refuse to transport troops if they weren't properly greased, let's say. Well, I guess in most governments, they do have their military and their navy separate, but the Imperium is basically a religious monarchy. It doesn't make sense for them to be separate. They should have something over them. But outside of that, I'm getting lost down the rabbit hole here. You've also got the Assassinorum, or the Officio Assassinorum, which is basically a government division of assassins. If you needed a reason not to trust your government anymore, it's that they have a department of literal assassination. And then you've got the Ecclesiarchy, which really isn't part of the government, but they are a massive faction vying for power. And we've seen throughout history why having a church, or having a church involved in the running of things, can be a really bad thing. I did not. So apparently, the black ships are a separate entity from the Navy and potentially also used as transportation if the Navy refuses. I can't imagine having to travel on a black ship, because I know that they're purposefully built to be disorienting, so the psychers inside can't get a hold on things. I imagine the whole ship can't be like that, because you've got to have people who actually fly the darn thing. And I also wonder, like, what if they have a psyker that genuinely wants to be part of whatever they're going to take them to? Do they have to stick them in the in the cells that drive them nuts? Like, hey, the guy's willing to come along. We'll stick him in the crazy cell, so when he gets there, he can't pay attention or think properly. It's so large, you need the Inquisition to have immunity in the across the Imperium, because if they didn't, they would not be able to fart without 6 months of red tape. Pretty much. The Inquisition by itself is kind of scary, but to a certain extent, I think their hands are so full that the sheer amount of work they have to do somewhat keeps them in check, as well as other Inquisitors, because there's nobody who's going to watch you more closely than an actual rival for power. I mean, but as far as just sheer power, the Inquisition definitely has the most. Though their job would probably be a lot harder if they started taking more liberties with the power that they have. Like, they have the power to basically conscript anybody into their service, and some inquisitors literally have armies. But I imagine if they started being like the military power of the Imperium, people would start having troubles, like, because that leads to a power imbalance within the Inquisition itself, and would actually make the High Lords a bit more trepidatious. That would actually be a really good. That would be a good struggle to have in the main storyline, a fight between the main power base of the Imperium and the Inquisition, because the Inquisition became just a little bit too powerful. But I think that would probably be the doom of the actual 40K universe, because the Inquisition does need to be somewhat powerful. Actually, I remember listening to a series on the Badab Crusade, and that was an interesting story because the whole thing had apparently wrapped up. Like, there was a war going on between two different sectors, and all this crazy stuff had happened, and the war was finally at an end. And the High Lords of Terra decided to send somebody to basically make things worse. Like, hey, the war is over, and they show up. It's like, yeah, but the winners are in the wrong, so we're going to need you guys to surrender. Which obviously they didn't do, and they prolonged the war. I love the constant theme that the government can that there's no problem so big that the government can't make it worse. Which honestly, for most 40K stories that I've read outside of Eisenhorn and Horus Rising, uh, the actual government just seems to show up to make things about 10 times worse than they originally were. It's like, hey, the problem's done. We fixed everything. And then the government comes like, well, no, not everything, because we decided it should go this way. So we're willing to throw millions of lives at this problem until it goes the way we want it to go. That being said, diplomacy is not in high supply in 40K. I've seen several times when so let's talk about the Eldar for a moment, because I have a genuine hatred for the space knife ears. Their form of diplomacy seems to be, we're right, we're superior, so do what we say, monkey. And I genuinely hate them, especially when they're fairly easy to deal with. Like, yeah, they're supposed to be superior. Maybe the games don't do justice to them. Maybe some of the books don't really do justice to what they're supposed to be. But honestly, they seem to be more of an annoyance. Like, they blame everybody for everything else that's wrong in the universe, not acknowledging that they're responsible for at least a quarter of the problems, because let's just say how can I phrase this while still being YouTube friendly? Their hedonism literally brought a god of chaos into existence that devoured most of the people in their civilization and literally scarred the galaxy. And yet they have the nerve to sit there and tell other people they're the problem. Now, don't get me wrong, humanity's done a lot of, I don't want to say terrible things, because everyone in this universe has done some terrible things. Yep, Slanesh, the Rule 34 of Warhammer 40K. Which I have to, so I can never spell the gods of chaos's names right. Every time except for Khorne. Khorne is easy, because I don't know why they decided to name the god of carnage Khorne. I assume they were trying to go for, well, some people might pronounce it Karn, which would be short for carnal or charnel or whatever, whichever one's the brutal one, not the reproductive one. But they named him Corn. And the first time I heard it, I thought of the vegetable. It's been years. Yes. Or the band. We have Korn, the band. Korn, the band of slaughter. Which I don't remember much Korn. Like the band Korn. I do not remember them very well. I remember them coming out when I was a teenager, because I'm ancient. And all my friends really liking them, but I have to say, I didn't much care. Like, I didn't dislike them, but they weren't the best, I'd have to say. Cornflakes and blood. Trust me, you do not want to put blood on your cereal, because it coagulates pretty quick, and pretty soon you're eating pudding. The reason the band name is Korn aligns more with Slanesh than Korn. I could see that. I didn't much care for Korn. Well, let's see if I can remember. So I remember Korn and Papa Roach came out when I was a teenager. There's what are some of the others? Good Lord. It's been forever. So I hung around in the circles that listen to that stuff, but Pink Floyd. So Pink Floyd was around long before I was a teenager, but everybody listened to Pink Floyd. Nurgle, I always want to put the extra G in his name. You know, Nurgle probably is the least worst of the Chaos Gods if you chose one to serve, but I still wouldn't want to serve him for the, eternal rotting thing that goes on there. Like, I'd like to keep my teeth. I'd like to stay in generally good health. And I really don't like sick things. Like Zinch would, I know a lot of people really like Zinch because he's kind of the source of magic and weirdness. But I think he would probably be one of the worst ones to serve just for the lack of consistency. Like just the constant changing and weird. Now, I haven't run into too much of Zinch, but he strikes me as the most nebulous and the least easy to understand. I guess that comes with being the font of change or whatever he actually calls himself, the weaver of dreams. That might be wrong. Well, how were they, Vox? Did you enjoy Korn as a team? I was I'm from the Bible Belt, so we didn't actually get many concerts like that. We usually went to Christian rock concerts, which is a good way to go deaf and not have a good time. I know a lot of my friends really liked them, but the thing about Christian rock and all this stuff that they tried to do here in the States to like make Christianity cool, they didn't have to do any of that. If they had stuck with some of the canon, like the deeper canon that the Catholics have, and just played up on some of that, they probably would have done a lot better. I don't think anybody can anymore. Like crap, do I remember a single one? I know for a while they were trying to do Christian death metal bands, and that just feels like such a contradiction. It's so weird. Zinch is the god of change, first of all. His whole stig is putting everyone up against everyone. Oh, so he's a woman with internet connection. Sorry, that was mean of me. I that I have to say that's not all women. I've known a lot of women that really like stability and don't like to put people up against each other. But I've known some women that, well, let's just say they eat, breathe, and dream about drama. Life metal. I feel like that should be a genre all to itself, and I don't feel like that should be directly tied to just Christian. Like, imagine a metal genre which is all about how great life can be and the cool stuff that you can do and the wonderful things you're going, but they're just being really violent about screaming it. I would listen to that at least once for the novelty. Please don't dedicate your life to making this just so I can listen to it once, because I can promise I have no staying power with it. Why are you? I'm assuming it was very foggy at the concerts. I hope it's not foggy where you are. Well, look it up and let me know if life metal is a thing. That would be pretty cool. Hey, I'm allowed to make generalizations because I understand the difference between generalizations and individuals. Like, there are individuals in 40K which are pretty cool individuals that go about and do the right thing and try to help people. And then there are outright monsters that just generally don't care. Most of them are in government or in a position of power. So I want to talk a little bit about Eisenhorn, because one of the things that I noticed in Eisenhorn is that if you're not on his side, it's like inevitable that you're going to betray Eisenhorn. Like, you're going to turn against him, or you've been a part of chaos. That might not be true of everything in there, but in the book that I read, that's what it felt like. If you weren't directly with him, you were eventually against him. Now, that being said, the book was enjoyable. Maybe it says something about a lot of indie books that I've been reading lately, but it reminded me a lot of the indie books I've been reading. Some of the twists and turns and how it was written, there was just seemed a bit more refined. My favorite Scream song has the vocalist get into semi coughing fit halfway through the song, and a second one takes over. That's how you know you got a good bandmate. You're over there hacking up along for whatever reason, and they'll jump in and save the show. I'm glad it's a bright day for you, Vox. It's a nice bright day here, except the wind's kicking up and tearing the roof off my house. Um, it really so as far as when I read books, sometimes I'll listen to classical music, like I'll put on something like classical music for studying because I'm really, really picky about my music. Like, I don't like genres. I like songs. If I like a song, I will play it till I hate it, and then I'll put it away for about 10 years, and then I'll listen to it again. It's like, why did I hate this song? So classical is just distant enough. How can I phrase this? I like classical because I'm not as attached to it where it will upset me to hear the same one again. But mostly I just read in silence. Being a Christian, I could not name a Christian rock band to save my life, though that may be more with being Slavic. Well, you definitely have better choices in metal bands being Slavic. I think that's a requirement to being Slavic, or sorry, to being in a metal band is to be truly great. You have to be Slavic. Eisenhorn is low key chaos. He kind of is. He just kind of flies by the seat. Now, that's not to diminish what he can do. He's actually very capable, but he feels like he flies by the seat of his pants. It's like, this is where I think the real danger is. So this is where I'm going to go. He just kind of does things that occur to him in the moment. That being said, for, so Eisenhorn, the first book was written over 20 years ago, which is painful to say. And some of the concepts in there seem to have evolved a lot in the last 20 years. Like a lot of things have changed. Like as an inquisitor, he doesn't feel as powerful as inquisitors I've seen in other stories. And I know that inquisitors, like almost anything else in 40K, run the gamut from not that powerful to apocalyptic level powerful. So it could just be the difference in capabilities and resources. Like Eisenhorn feels more like a detective than an actual inquisitor. Like, yeah, he's got the authority to do all this stuff, but he's like a detective if the detective really didn't have to report to anybody. His whole job was to go out and do this one thing. And I guess it kind of, I was like, well, where does he get his funding? Well, he can request anything from anyone. So I guess that solves that problem. I wonder, speaking of Christian rock and not being able to name it, I wonder if 40K has some kind of equivalent, like they have Emperor Rock or the Imperial Rock bands, where they'll just praise the Emperor. Well, I guess all music basically is that in 40K because I don't think they tolerate much else. So, one other concept that I wanted to address in 40K is the physical power versus psychic power. So, there's a line from a show years and years ago, like when I was a kid, that said, regardless of magic or technology, power is power. And in a lot of senses, that seems to be true in 40K. Now, not always. You're not going to be able to take on a greater demon with a sharpened metal stick, but you could take him out possibly with an orbital bombardment. And it's that I like I always hate stories where, like, oh, the vampire can't be hurt except with this kind of power, or you can't kill the werewolf unless you use exactly this silver thing. Like, I'd like to think that an artillery shell hitting it would probably take it out. And in 40K, there seems to be a lot of truth to that. Now, that being said, there are certain things that are going to be a lot harder to deal with that kind of power. I remember that. So I don't remember what story this is, but apparently in 40K, one of the Grey Knights is in possession of this demonic sword, and the demonic sword is basically a world ender. Like it can possess everybody else, but for some strange smooth brain reason, he can't get this one particular Marine. And this Marine ends up fighting a Herald of Corn, or like one of the right hands to him. And the sword hates this particular Herald and is begging the Grey Knight to just let me use some of my power to kill him. Let me help you destroy this thing. I'll ask for absolutely nothing in return. And the smooth brain Space Marine just ignores him and continues to pound away at this demon with what's basically just a metal stick, doing absolutely no damage, to the point that they closed the warp rift that summoned it, and the demon just disappeared because he ran out of energy. I love that the greatest defense, one of the greatest defense you could have against chaos, is just to be smooth brained. Like, just be like, no, no, I'm not listening to anything you say or anything you want. Even if it will directly help me, I will not listen to you. uh, Greater demons take longer to come back based on the how hard you killed it. Hmm. I mean, I imagine that would be true for any immortal. Like, so I don't know if you guys remember the Justice League cartoon, but one of my favorite characters from that was Vandal Savage. And I like that particular iteration because he can't die. But I imagine he would recover from getting stabbed in the heart a lot faster than getting hit with an artillery shell. So I guess that would apply to almost any immortal being. Like, it would be much harder to take out, or it'd be much harder to recover from being spread across a quarter mile than having a small inconvenient hole punched in your chest. That is one of the things I really love about 40K is it's silly. Even though it's dark and horrible, it's just kind of silly. But speaking of silly, and because I'm probably a little stupid, I love the orcs. They're by far my favorite part of 40K because they're absolutely ridiculous. And I remember years back they had the Gorka Morka game, which is like the racing game for the orcs. And I thought, well, they should bring that back, but they should add the survival crafting stuff, make it a racer where you go around collecting scrap and are able to attach random guns and stuff to your car, and make it like a combination of GTA and Twisted Metal, where you're basically going around shooting stuff with your car. And I just think that would be a really fun game. But we'll see if Games Workshop ever does something like that. The Grey Knights are basically incorruptible. Be it will or ignorance, the call of chaos will not be heard. Hey, sometimes the greatest defense against something is to simply be too dense to let it get to you. Like, what's the old saying? Lord, the autistic are immune to propaganda. Like, if you are incapable of actually considering the offer, considering the idea, I mean, it really can't affect you. That being said, it would still be a detriment because you might not be able to take in something that might actually help you. But if you spurn any new ideas outright, you are somewhat protected from those ideas and the bad things that'll come about from them. That being said, I think the orcs are also incorruptible, or at least not very easy to corrupt, which is weird because they're violent and gross. So you think Nurgle and Khorne would be all over them. But I think Gork and Mork have a stranglehold. And I do love the concept of Gork and Mork, that the twin deities that are basically identical, but they're distinguishable enough that there's going to be holy wars fought about it. I'm not sure if that was supposed to be a jab at how crazy and weird religion can be sometimes. Like how the Protestants and Catholics will fight each other, even though they technically worship the same God. That being said, religion is always a crazy topic. And I do like that. I like 40K for the fact that we have a science fiction setting where magic is basically a thing. Yes, they describe it as being psychic, but I love the concept of magic and technology being a thing and possibly working against each other, but possibly working with each other. Like, I think the Calexis Temple of the Officio Assassinorum has a device that helps blanks focus their power better to where they can literally project a beam of blankness, I guess, and destroy something's soul. Like they're one of the few things in 40k that can actually kill a demon. Like how horrifying is that? A being that is so nothing on the inside that they can literally eradicate your soul by looking at you. Granted, 40k also has the problem of too many cooks in the kitchen. So yeah, it's great that there's a lot of different stories and there's lots of different variants between the powers of different beings and different organizations, but a little bit of consistency would go a long way. Let's see here. Yep, part of the large helmet that they wear enhances their blank characteristics. Like, how do you enhance nothing? Like, is there some kind of ultra minimalist thing to it? What could you use to enhance the not having a soul ability of something that doesn't have a soul? Like, how do you enhance absence? This is the engineer and me getting pedantic. I remember the excerpt. Knight, brother, you've lost an arm. Knight 2 pointing to the floor. No, I haven't. It's right there. uh, I mean, how big? So I'm not 100% certain. How big of a detriment is it in 40k to lose your arm? Like, can they reattach it, or do you automatically have to go to a prosthetic? I know that a lot of people in 40k have lost their. I know the orcs can just reattach their arms. I don't know about the humans, and I certainly don't know about the Tau because they're space commies, and I don't care about them. Actually, they're kind of worse than space commies. They're space commies with a caste system, so they're like the two worst forms of government thrown together and given sniper rifles. Also, they're blue and physically unappealing. So, like, how do you make blue aliens that aren't appealing? That's a sin right there in sci-fi. All your blue aliens must be appealing in one way or another. Prevents their soul from leaking. That is a vital thing. You certainly do not want your soul to leak. I hate having to come into the house and cleaning soul up off the floor because somebody simply did not maintain like they were supposed to. uh, I guess it really would depend on the world because there are worlds that are far more advanced than others. That being said, I think somebody made a point that even on the feudal worlds, they incorporate the Imperium's medicine so that the people don't get sick so they can live longer because they'll just pull people from it and throw them in the Imperial Legion, which seems really dumb. You've got these people who've never known a weapon beyond a sharpened stick, and we're going to hand them a las rifle. It's like, it's like, hey, I know you've lived on this dirt farm your whole life and never seen a paved road, but now we're about to teach you about mixed unit tactics and laser weapons. Feels like there's going to be a bit of culture shock there. I also love the idea of feudal worlds that we just going to dump a bunch of people here and keep them at the level of technology like right before industrialization. It's like, no, you guys get to live like the Amish for the rest of your life and the rest of your children's life and on and on. Just do your thing and try not to die. They do have tech that basically rejuvenates bodies so wealthy people can naturally live up to 300 years. Probably not too far fetched to say they could also reattach limbs. Well, medically speaking, there's a big difference between, restoring somebody's. I'm assuming the rejuvenation basically just restores the DNA so that it can copy properly so that you have the youthful appearance because your DNA degrades over time. But that's something incredibly different from doing things like reattaching nerve endings and blood vessels. I'm sure they could probably do it, but time is a factor when attaching limbs. It might just be easier to go for a prosthetic. And I know from some of the stories that a lot of nobles actually do have prosthetics they just keep throughout their whole lives. And I can see the advantage of having a prosthetic. I mean, like you could hide stuff in it. It's not going to be like replacement parts are easier to get than how can I phrase this? I imagine reattaching a limb is a much more laborious process than simply giving them an augmetic that allows them to do what they were doing before. And I mean, augmetics are great. You can, the moment we get replacement limbs that are stronger than our own, I'm probably definitely going to look at them with with some interest. Like I would love to be stronger and faster and have things I could hide. I guess it really depends on how inconvenient they are to fuel. That's something I haven't really looked into in 40K. Like, what do the augmetics run off of? Do they run off of things that happen in the body, or do they have to be taken off and charged? Like, do you have to plug a little USB-C into your leg every day to make sure it works properly? Do you have to do that when you sleep? I mean, I think most people, well, I think most people would given time. I mean, it's not like we don't already use machines in our daily life to improve ourselves. I mean, people have glasses, we have cell phones so we can communicate long distances. We use megaphones. Hell, even something like a pen is basically a machine that you are augmenting yourself with to do something your body couldn't do. Now you've mentioned mixed Unix tactics. I hate the fact that they have it in lore, but almost every video depicts its 18th century tactics of standing and shooting. So, and this is just my thoughts on why they do this in 40K. So, I think one of the reasons they don't employ more modern strategies is because they don't have to. Most of the things they fight are going to, so like the Tyranids are going to straight charge, the Orcs are going to straight charge. The only ones that you would really have to use any more complex tactics on would be the Eldar and the Tau because they have more advanced weapons. But they can literally drown their enemies in bodies. Like the way the Imperium calculates war, they don't calculate like how can we beat this person? What tactics should we use? They think how many bodies do we have to throw at the problem till the problem basically goes away? Can we hit this thing from orbit? Can we carpet bomb the planet? Can we afford to just use a virus bomb? You know, they look for the most mechanical solution they can possibly look at. The fiddly bits of tactics and, you know, considering approaching from a different angle, possibly like anything beyond flanking, I think is a bit too advanced for the monstrous machine that is the Ministorum, the Minotaurum. I don't think they really care about the individual life. Like a lot of the tactics we use nowadays is because we, and I could be wrong, and you could feel free to correct me, because we care about casualties. But the Imperium doesn't. They're just like, hey, throw endless waves of people at it until the problem goes away. We're going to simply grind it into the dirt, and then we're done. I remember with the Siege of Rocks, they were looking at how long is this going to take and how many men are we going to have to use. And really, the more important factor was how long is this going to take? That's why they chose the, well, they had the Death Corps of Krieg to use, but that's why they chose the 12-year time frame with, I think it was about 8 million people worth of losses. And when you have a machine that doesn't care about the human life, using anything beyond simple mixed unit tactics and mass wave formations and stand and shoot is really pointless. I mean, they use servitors in combat. So honestly, though, I think they value the combat servitors more than they value the life of an individual soldier. Because the combat servitors filled with a lot of complicated stuff. You know, it's going to be more difficult to replace the servitor than it is going to be to replace the soldier because the parts that make the servitor valuable are not the flesh inside. So I guess it really comes down to what you're best at. It's like how we've currently got the war over there in Russia and Ukraine, and it's devolved into trench warfare. And now, don't get me wrong, I'm not a big war buff, but from what I understand, Ukraine is one of the worst places in the world to do trench warfare because it's wide open plains or whatever land they have over there. And so it makes using tanks a lot better. So, but for some reason, it's devolved into trench warfare again, which we thought we were done with about 100 years ago. Well, from what I understand of warfare and tactics, we kind of just go in a cycle of things. Arguably, yes, advanced tactics get results faster, but you also have to keep in mind that would so from what I understand, one of the reasons the Imperium doesn't implement some of these advanced tactics and doesn't allow most of their worlds to deploy more than one type of legion. Like one world will do an artillery regiment, another world will do an infantry regiment, another world will do an armored regiment, is because it makes the worlds easier to basically bring back into compliance if they rebel or fall to chaos. It's a security measure that they put in place. So having advanced tactics would make that necessary on a one particular world because you need to bring a lot of stuff together. And giving one world access to advanced tactics would make them much more difficult to overthrow. So I don't think it's so much that they can't use advanced tactics. I think they purposefully avoid advanced tactics. Even if it would achieve things faster, I think they find the risk of somebody else being more like the high lords and the people who run the military find it too much of a risk to allow any one planet to become too powerful, at least one they don't trust enough to become more powerful. I wonder if an Ogren servitor would be more or less effective than regular ones are. I guess it would depend on what they were using the servitor for. Like you could make heavy industrial machinery out of an Ogren, like something that could carry a lot more. But Ogren might be more useful with what they're currently doing. I haven't heard of a story where they made an Ogren servitor. I mean, Ogren are basically very simple-minded and easy to get to do what you want. So making an Ogren servitor seems kind of redundant. But I could imagine, giving them the prolonged life and using them for like loading bulk freighters and things like that would be very, very useful if they don't already have something that does a better job. That being said, I don't know too much about the Ogren. I know that they're a demi-humans, or well, they're close enough to humans that they're accepted. But as far as like where they actually come from, like do they have to breed Ogren? Do they just kind of mutate from normal human stock? Like do they just pop up? Like some people have a kid and all of a sudden it turns out to be an Ogren? Or are the Ogren themselves actually breeding? Which leads to a bunch of ethical questions, which 40K really doesn't do ethics. I will say that, so getting back to Eisenhorn a bit at the beginning, my favorite part of, of Eisenhorn is where he's fighting in the cryo casket chamber, and all those ruling elites basically expire, and everybody's mad about it. And I'm like, what are you complaining about? You literally just cut the bureaucracy of this world in half. I mean, you've ensured a greater happiness for the populace and greater production than you ever could have. I mean, I think they killed like I think like 4,000 of them died. And it's like 4,000 nobles. Like, how much more of that money could go into like industrial capacity or virtually anything else? I can't think of a greater waste of money or production than having an elite ruling nobility. But then I'm very anti-monarchical or monarchical or whatever you say there. I'm very anti-ruling class. But to a great extent, I'm anti a lot of things. That being said, so I want to touch a bit more on the Eldar because I just found out doing a little bit of research from getting a little bit interested how they run their society. So where you or I would set our goals and aspirations and the things that we'd want to achieve and basically go out and work independently, the Eldar don't appear to do that. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the Eldar appear to, so they have their Farseers that basically just tell them what to do. I mean, imagine basing your entire life and everything you do every day on what a fortune teller tells you to do. And they're completely fine. I mean, the Farseers actually see into the future, but the Eldar don't seem to have really a concept of independence. And I think that's one of the things that makes them so alien. Like they won't do what's best for them. It's really hard for them to break from their group. And yes, that's true to humans for an extent, or to an extent. But humans are, at least men. I know a lot of men who will just simply say screw it and leave and go do their own things. Like, hey, I'm going to go make my own business with blackjack and hookers. But that being said, the Tau are a lot the same way. Like they highly depend on their upper class to tell them what to do and set them into the cast that they're going to be in. Granted, I think at this point their cast is pretty much set from birth. If I remember correctly, it's already affected their biology. Like you've got the which one's the flying? I know you got the fire cast, which is the warriors. I think the earth cast are the builders, and I think the water class isn't the water cast like the upper crust, but which one's the flyers? But either way, the flying cast already has lighter bones and lighter builds, so they really, I don't think, can be good for much of anything else. That being said, I don't spend a lot of time on the Tau. I really don't like water as diplomats. That's what I thought. Air cast. Why didn't I think of air? Because I know they're based on the elements. I don't know if there's a synchronization for when the Tau came to be and Avatar: The Last Airbender was a thing, but I feel like there was some rip off there. Granted, those are the old school elements, so I could be entirely wrong. I don't much care for the Tau. Honestly, like I've said before, my favorite faction in 40K is still the Orcs because they're ridiculous and funny. Like any game that I have to play, so I played the Space Marine game where you're basically fighting orcs the whole time, and I just can't take them seriously because they're silly. Like with their stunty legs and giant arms and the little screaming goblins, I find them hilarious. Yes, I get that orcs are like 10-foot tall murder machines and keep growing throughout their whole life and are probably one of the greatest threats to the Imperium should they ever unite under any particular warlord, but I find them comical. The Ogrins are strong enough to wield Astartes level firepower and controllable, and breeding them is far cheaper and easier than making Astartes. Being even 1% as good as a Space Marine is massive. Yes, I could imagine the Ogren are an amazing military asset, but the Astartes have an the Astartes have an advantage in being more like the special forces. Like the advanced tactics we were talking about earlier would probably be more applied to the Space Marines because they could accomplish them a lot easier. Though the Space Marines themselves feel, I want to say something a little bit controversial. I find the Space Marines to probably be the most uninteresting part of 40K. And that's not to say they aren't great for the story and I don't like them. It's just they're massive powered armored Space Marines that they're massive powered armored super soldiers that are almost as far removed from humanity as any of the Xenos. So while so I don't know how to phrase this properly. Like playing Rogue Trader, I found a Space Marine. I'm like, oh yes, I want to have a Space Marine for my collection of various misfits I'm pulling from the rest of the world. But being the main focus of a story, I find the Space Marines to be kind of tedious. Like I find the power struggles between the different factions and the actual human factions, not counting the Space Marines, to be more interesting. So the Tau came into lore in 2001. Okay. Well, I guess I can't accuse them of taking the idea from there. I mean, it's not too far fetched. I think Games Workshop has stolen most of their ideas from somewhere else. I remember there was a schism years back where they were trying to trademark the word pauldrons. Like, how can you trademark medieval armor? Or is pauldrons medieval? Somewhere out there, someone's going to watch this and be screaming, no, those are actually such and such period. It's like, I'm just interested enough that I know they exist. I don't know exactly the period. Most of my energy is spent reading people's books, reading books on writing, and working in my garden, which is coming along fantastically. I'm going to have a whole bed of strawberries this year. It's a minor break. I love things that involve eating and reading. Those are my two major hobbies. That and occasionally playing some games. Oh, games tied to copyright candy. What? And I think they succeeded to a degree. How can you copyright the word? Well, so here's something that's going to make some people mad. And I didn't know about this till a while back. And this is just dealing with our own world. So apparently, you can copyright or patent actual plants, like the genetic sequence of plants. There was a trial where a farmer used part of his harvest to replant his field so he could grow some more soybeans. I think it was soybeans. And the company he bought the seeds from, I think it was Moderna or one of these big pharmacy companies, they sued him and won, saying that he had to buy new seeds in order to replant his field because they owned the rights to that genetic sequence. Well, the problem is bees will cross pollinate. So even if you start growing organics, if they cross pollinate with whatever the pharmaceutical company has created, you can get sued for using part of their copyright. And that's law. Like if you're actually farming, you can't just replant part of your crop and save seeds from year to year, which I think is a stupid major expense. But that's my thoughts on that. Space Marines are similar to the Heavy from TF2. Basic but essential to the core identity. Yes, exactly. Space Marines are great. They're an integral part of the story. I just don't find them as fascinating as I find, say, the Assassinorum or the Inquisition, or even just, a fight that has to be done by the Imperial Guard. Because the Space Marines are just they're really good at what they do, but I think outside the Badab Crusade, I think that was probably where I found the Space Marines the most interesting because they started engaging in politics. And I like political power struggles. I believe their case doesn't let people use the word candy in reference to mobile games. I could see that with how current law is on copyright. Copyright law is really weird. So, like with books, you can't copyright a book, like a book title, but you can copyright a series title. So, if Harry Potter had been one book, she couldn't have, Rowling couldn't have copyrighted Harry Potter as a name or as a title for a book. She could copyright it as a character, but not as a title for a book. But since as a series, she's able to copyright the name for the books. And if I remember how copyright law works specifically, because there's a bunch of books that have the same name. I'm not kidding. Like if you ever start reviewing books and you go to put your reviews on Goodreads, you'll notice that just typing in the name of a book might not be sufficient. Sometimes you have to search by the author because there's a million things with the same name. Yeah, there's a lot of trees that are the same way with that. That still really irritates me. And, eventually that won't be a thing because nothing lasts forever. But it does irritate me that you can copyright genetic sequence. I mean, how can you copyright something that's alive? That's, I mean, eventually they'll get to where they copyright dogs and they'll be sterilizing them before you can go buy them, which some places already do. And then you won't be able to let your dog have puppies. Not that I've let any of my dogs have puppies because I love my dogs, but they're a handful all by themselves. Currently, I don't have any pets, but I do miss my dogs. They went with my old roommate because she went to move out into the country and her hands don't work too well to operate a weapon. So she's got the puppos. That being said, uh, just off an on an offshoot, I don't hear much about dogs in 40K. I guess they don't exist anymore. Like I haven't seen them. I haven't seen them in any of the stories or mentioned in any of the lore. Like the only animals I think I can really remember from 40K are the Groks, and the Groks are just giant. Well, they're giant lizards that will basically eat anything. It's their meat animals now. I mean, I had to lobotomize them first, but yeah, the ferret industry does that too. So you can also that's also done with Finnick foxes, which are the only domestic foxes that you can get. But if you get one, they come sterilized. So you're not going to be able to set up your own Finnick's fox breeding operation. Granted, that industry might be taking a hit because they come from Russia, and Russia's not in a good position right now. So there are dogs in 40K. Yeah, mastiffs would make sense because mastiffs are war dogs. That being said, poodles are war dogs, so and chihuahuas. But at least if the internet can be believed, which most of the time it can't, I think that's where the term ankle biter came from. I just the chihuahua is a vicious little monster, and other dogs are always afraid of them. But I just can't imagine them as war dogs. Though I want to see that in the next 40K book. I want to see them unleash the chihuahuas on the Tyranids. We don't need dogs to be mongrels. We have commissars for that. I resent that because in Rogue Trader, I picked a commissar background just because I wanted to be a vicious monster. And then I wanted to be a good guy, and then I ended up becoming a vicious monster anyway. I do love that 40K adopted the commissar because I think they're hilarious. I like the idea of a government so good it has to impose officers that if you don't toe the line, we'll shoot you in the head. That's uh 40K has a lot of things I really like about storytelling, but it also has that problem with the too many cooks in the kitchen. Like you've got too many people working in the same universe, so you get a lot of contradicting information. Like I'm not about to sit and read the entire Horus Heresy saga because what's it like 50, 60 books long, and I honestly don't I can't bring so the first book Horus Rising was pretty bad. Like well, I mean it wasn't terrible. It was enjoyable from a lore standpoint and looking at how an important event happened, but I honestly wouldn't pick it up again. And it really didn't encourage me to continue reading the rest of the series. I would like to see how it went, but I've heard there's been a lot of really odd things that have been going on in the Horus Heresy. So, and honestly, does it need to be 40 books long? I mean, I get having this whole epic saga, but it's 40 books long and it's written by a whole bunch of different people. And from what I hear, it doesn't sound like they worked together on it. It sounds like they all just kind of like, oh yeah, this is like I'm going to look at the Wikipedia and then I'm going to write a book on it. And departing from 40K here and just getting into actual writing, this is one of the things that I hate about the author profession. That a lot of people just become an author that churns things out. Like they become like a romance author where they take the same story and they just palette swap the characters and setting. And I want writing to be I like books that are different. I like there needs to be new stories and explorations of things which might not always be popular and might not always work. But I really hate when every story is the same thing. And that's one of the things that I get burnt out with that I feel like and that's not to insult anybody because everybody gets inspired by a lot of the same stuff. But oftentimes it feels like a lot of books are just the same story told over and over again. And I think one of the problems with that is there's been a lot made about the hero's journey. Everybody wants to tell the hero's journey. Well, that's great, but we might need to depart a bit from that and tell a different story. Yeah, when every book is the hero's journey, it gets played out and jaded. And picking up a new book is just an exercise in attrition because I'm going to be reading the same story over and over again. Which is why sometimes I'll pick up something different. Like it's one of the reasons why I picked up a Western a long time ago. The 40K books I've enjoyed the most was the Night Lord's Omnibus. Really the only one I recommend anymore besides Infinite and Divine. I might have to look into that. I try not to do the same thing or the same stuff over and over again. I like to bounce around a bit because I really am just interested in the different stories and finding something new and something. So I find that a lot of first time authors, and I'm no exception, tend to write your first book is always going to be your worst book. And that's not to say that every first book is going to be bad. But the first book is where you get all your cliches out. Your first book is where you get all the stuff that's kind of been built up by the different shows that you've watched and all the different games that you've played. That's where all that stuff goes into. You're kind of clearing the passage for the next stuff to come out. And that might carry on for a book or two or three. But the first book is always the worst. It's like with Shad's first book. You can tell that it has a lot of the same influence of if you pay attention to some of the personal parts of his life, that all wheedled its way into his book. Like the influence from everyone else. And it's just like when you first start writing, you have to get a little bit into it before it starts becoming who you are, what you think, and the original stories you have to tell. Not everybody gets there, but we all have to get those first few books out of the way. Those things like, oh, we saw the show, and wouldn't it be cool to tell this story from my perspective? But that's just what I've. And also, I haven't made videos on every book that I've read. Some books, I just feel like I don't want to bash the person who wrote this. This is their first book. It's really rough. And while I think they could benefit from it, there's not going to be enough nice things I could say to make this a proper review. And I don't want to just rag on any one person unless you're a big time. I don't even want to say big time, unless you're like a really successful TikTok author who's gotten a little bit too big. Let's continue on here. I prefer to read singular books. One interesting book or a pair of good books is more of my speed. About 10 books in a series is dragging the plot out. It really can be. If you're going to write a 10-book series, you need to make sure you have enough interesting stuff to put in it. It's rare. It's really rare. Most stories I've read could have been a much shorter book. In fact, if you're a first-time author and I'm working on a book on helping people who want to write a story, I'm just going to go over my own process and lay it out. You don't have to copy it. There's a lot of people who do this who will say, you have to copy mine exactly if you want to do a fantastic book, and they've never released a fantastic book. But I'm going to list out my process as something people might, if it helps anybody, hey, that's great. I'd like to help anybody who wants to write a story because writing's fun. Telling your story is great. But not everybody's going to have the same process. A book is a very personal thing. And some people are going to fly by the seat of their pants. Some people live so in the moment and so in their story that that's the only way they can tell their story. And some people really want to plan things out. Usually, from what I've found, and this isn't always true, most of the people who really like to plan things out, they're big world builders. What they want to create is a world. To be honest, I got into writing to spite all the bad media out there. There are worse reasons to get into writing. But I feel that writing is, and this is my ideal on this, I feel writing is just something you want to do to express the stories that you want to tell. And none of them may turn out to be a bestseller. None of them may turn out to even be that popular. But you're telling your story. If you're going to write, you have to ask yourself, is this something I would do even if nobody was paying me? It's a hobby that might one day pay something. Did you ever read the Onisen books? Those have absolutely been dragged into the mud. I have not read them. I haven't. I don't think I've even heard of them until this point. I think the what's the longest book series? Well, if we're counting manga, that would be One Piece because I actually caught up to that about a year ago, and then I let it sit. Now I'm like now I'm about 50 chapters behind. One Piece just drags out, and one of the reasons I keep up with it is not so much that I'm a big fan. It's because it came out when I was in high school, and it's one of the first mangas I started reading. And I feel some kind of dedication to see how it ends because it's been going on for over 20 years at this point. And I'm like, okay, this has to end eventually until, it ends. And then the next year he announces One Piece Shippuden or something like that, in which case I'm just going to burn all my books of that. Yeah, in the beginning, I wrote a particularly painful scene regarding some bodily functions, and I'm glad I've been told to delete it. Yeah, that's where the term kill your darlings come from. So you'll spend a lot of time sometimes on a particular scene or a particular chapter that actually doesn't advance the story and can detract from it. I've got several chapters myself that other people have told me didn't really need to be there and that I've looked at and it's like, yeah, this really doesn't feel like what the character would do and it's just it's gone a little bit too far. But in writing, I encourage you to try. Like, even if it doesn't make it into the final book, just try it. Do it. If you don't use it there, it might be fodder for something later. Writing's one of those things you should always be working on. And actually, nowadays, I spend more time writing scripts than writing my own books. Granted, I do have my next book coming out soon, but I realized I had I neglected something really important. So I was working on all the other stuff associated with the book, and I realized I hadn't got a cover done. And so I contacted the guy I used for the cover for this series, and he's been really busy lately because his work is popping off. And so it takes a couple weeks to get anything. So I guess during that time I'll work on making the audio book, which is something I would like to do. I'd like to make more books into audio books because it does bring you to a wider audience. Some books really need to be audio books. Like if your book is longer than 500 pages, you need to make it an audio book because most people don't have the time to sit and listen to it or to sit and read it. And being able to listen to your book is, well, it's going to make things a lot easier. And one of the things you really want, and now I encourage anyone, if you can get this done, get this done. Get a live reading of your book done. It will be one of the hardest things you ever have to do. It will hurt. It will raise your blood pressure, and it will make every single mistake you made plainly apparent. And the public nature of it will ingrain it in your mind so that you know the things that you have to work on. No author can improve without feedback, but if you really want to make the errors in your own writing apparent, get a live reading done. Like so I had my first book, Battle Games, read on the Loin stream on Ian Kirkpatrick's channel, and I don't know what other people thought of it, but it was a rough time for me because I got to see just how rough my prose were, and so I had the second book in the series ready to go. I thought, and I'm like, okay, this is a major problem, so I had to go through and spend months researching how to strengthen my prose and taking a second whack at it. And I've seen a lot of people who do what I do, who review books and talk about literature. And one of the things they talk about is your book has to be great the first time. Well, your first book's not going to be great. There's nothing you can do that will make your first book as strong as it would be as if it were your 10th book because you simply don't have the experience. At some point, you have to put a story out there to be the first story to make all the mistakes on. And this might just be my opinion. And this also doesn't have to be something you publish. But I think with the ease of publishing nowadays and to help combat AI, we should probably simply be publishing more. Like if you write, publish. If you write a story, publish. The worst thing you c yes, it's a little expensive to get editing, but I advise it one thing I would advise anybody who wants to be an author, make your first book or your first 2 or 3 books a novella. Make it something short because it's going to be easier to point out your mistakes. It's not going to take as long, and the costs associated with editing and cover art with editing aren't going to be as great. You could even get it done as an audiobook for much, much cheaper. Save your series for when you're really ready to, like when you've perfected all your other stuff. I think I made a mistake in making my first 2 books part of a bigger series. I really should have stuck with the one-off stories. But the thing is, it's one of those things you don't know about until you really get out there and do. And I've heard everybody say they want to write a book. So if you want to write a book, I encourage you to start with a novella. Try to keep it under 25,000 words. Speaking of which, I've got one that I have to read soon. I did that once, but the audience started to laugh. The jokes that I had in the story was very Terry Pratchett inspired at the time. It felt amazing. See, that's great. You get to have that's some good feedback. That's a good memory for you. It's something to encourage you to do. But I'm sure that you might have also seen something. So, as the author, you're going to see things that other people don't see because you are really attached to the story. And having somebody else read it, have somebody else fumble over parts that you didn't know were an issue, are going to be a learning experience. That being said, some people will do much better their first time than I did. I like my first book. I love my first story, but it's probably the weakest of the stories that I've written so far, and that will be true of almost anyone. That being said, I would argue that Alex Astor's second book is probably worse than her first. Now, most people will. I've talked to some people that say it's better. I think it's worse. I think it's far worse. Nightbane is probably one of the worst books I've ever read. But I have to read this kind of stuff. One, because it makes good videos and I like to have a little fun. But two, because it's good to expose yourself to what you think is bad and the things you don't want to mimic. And we've gotten a little off of what the initial reason for this video was. So, getting back to 40K, the actual world, one of the things that I really, really like about it. Hmm, no, lost my train of thought there. So, one of the things I think that makes it have really good stories is that no matter where you set somebody, there's going to be a struggle. And struggle is one of the things that makes a character a character. So it took a while to get to this, and it took a while to figure this out, and I actually had to read it from a couple people before it really sank in. Your character needs to struggle, but they don't need to be victimized. And the difference between the two feels kind of subtle, but it's not. So a character is someone who acts against this thing or who works against this thing or works to improve their lot. And a victim is just somebody who things happen to. Now in 40K, you got a lot of both. You've got both victims and you've got characters, but there's a lot of potential to have great struggles and great characters from those struggles. Like the entire universe is awful. Well, I say it's all awful. Having looked at some of the things in our own world, we're not doing as great. But this isn't a politics channel. You can find somebody else for that. But there's a lot of horrible things going on in 40K, from planets being invaded by Tyranids to planets falling to chaos to planets that are just under strict imperial rule, like penal colonies or penal legions. Can you imagine being forced to fight in the 41st millennium because somebody said you committed a crime and it could have been as easy as tucking your napkin into the wrong pocket? But that's one of the things I think makes 40K fun, is that the struggle can come from anywhere. Like everything in the there's so much in the universe that's completely unfair. Oh, let's talk about slice of life. Yeah, so slice of life is a completely different genre, and I've probably fell victim to it myself a few times. Slice of life can be fun for when you just want that feel good. You don't want a story that particularly challenges you. I've watched a few slice of life book or slice of life shows, and it can be nice. It can give you those warm fuzzies that just take away from some of the misery. Because as the meme goes, men have two states where they want everything to be okay, and then they want that last stand moment. 40K is definitely the last stand moment, and it's completely okay to enjoy completely contradictory forms of storytelling. Like 40K does not mesh well with. Okay, so I have a challenge to anybody out there who's willing to accept it. I want to see a slice of life comic or book or anything set in the 40K universe. You're just going to have slice of life going on. And the catch is it absolutely has to include the terrible stuff. I want to see this done. We need 40K slice of life. Somebody who's an artist get onto that, because that would and just post it on Twitter. I guarantee you're going to get all the followers, just everybody following you, because the 40K fandom is probably one of the weirdest groups of people I've ever met. I mean, that's not in a bad way. I've found some fantastic people in the 40K fandom, and I mean the honest fans, not the people who try to change everything. Hey, that's a popular topic. Let's talk about that. So, to, I really hate when people come into something and then try to change it into something else, because there's always going to be something that's going to scratch a particular itch. You might not have found it yet, but there's always going to be something out there that scratches a particular itch. The homogenization that happens when a bunch of people try to clamor into a particular hobby and change it into something else. Like, okay, so this is my personal gripe. So I used to be really big into Magic the Gathering. And I liked the old lore, like the Urza versus Mishra stuff, like the way that planeswalkers used to be when they were practically all powerful. And the only thing that limited them was their knowledge and what they could understand. They were all powerful, but not all knowing. Then we came to the, I want to call it the Time Chase saga, where they nerfed all the planeswalkers. So now planeswalkers only had the ability to move between different worlds and gain different knowledge. And I feel like that really detracted from what planeswalkers were. Now, if you're not familiar with the lore, the planeswalker is supposed to be a fill-in for the character. When you play Magic the Gathering, you're playing a planeswalker where you traveled to different universes and pulled all these different spells. But they nerfed it, and it ended up becoming almost Super Friends-ish. Like, it felt very, and this happened before Marvel was a thing, but it felt very Marvel. Like, oh, we're a collection of super friends and we're going around fighting all these horrible, terrible things. And it used to be more of a mortals becoming immortal, super powered beings, the struggle with that. You're going to run. So, yeah, I was into MTG until I ran out of money. From what I understand, the same thing is true of 40K. It's a bankrupting hobby, which I'm fully encouraging people with 3D printers to go out there and do their magic. And I look forward to that. Send me a notice on Twitter when you tag me in Twitter when you do this the first time, because I want to see it. I encourage anybody who can make a comic to make a comic. I do not possess the hardware to make a comic, and most of my money is going into other things. Bale Bundy does a lot of really cool stuff. I really like Bale Bundy. He does some. He's done. I really want to see him continue the storyline with that freak show of they had the tall Hobbit. It had the beardless dwarf and the tall hobbit and the magical girl orc. I really want to see that storyline continue because that was really unnerving. I so Bell Bundy's one of those. Bell Bundy's a fun little thing to watch. I really like his comics. I don't think he's done any 40K comics, and I'd really like to keep this on 40K, but that can be a little bit complicated. I'm not as deep into the lore as I would like to be, but the thing is, I also want to find new stories out there. It's one of the reasons why, well, I end up reviewing a lot of sci-fi and fantasy, and I'd like to find some more stuff. It's somebody recommended this amygdala story, which looks really weird. And that's one of the few things that really draws me into it because everything else about the book would probably put me off. It's a story about animals creating civilization, and it's 1,000 pages. It's a big old honking story, but it's got a lot of 5-star reviews. And some of the other people who do what I do, who review these stories, they've read it and they have some. I'm avoiding their reviews of it because I'm thinking I might read it and do a special on it. But it looks weird, and I really have a fondness for weirdness. That's led me some really dark places that we're not going to talk about on stream because it'll get my channel shut down. But weirdness is always fun, and I live in an area where you've got a bunch of rednecks and you got a bunch of hippies, and the hippies all drive around with the sticker saying "Keep the area weird." I'm like, I'm sorry, dude, this area ain't as weird as you think it is. You're granted it is weird, but it's one of the things that's fascinating about this area. I live out with the bears and the cougars and the snakes, so if it weren't for the internet, you guys wouldn't get my opinions. I'd just be over here reading mangas all by myself, which isn't a bad life. That used to be my Friday night. Oh, well, folks, my throat is thoroughly sore. I think I'm going to call it there. I appreciate you all joining me for this talk about 40K and some of the weird stuff in it and some of the concepts in it, as well as some of the other things like Christian rock, which I'm hoping doesn't make a comeback. It just felt so odd. Well, I appreciate you all being here. I wish you all good luck. Have a good Sunday. I'm off to get ready for work. Goodbye, everybody.